PL funding. Sorry. No worries. The first program source is PL funding. That's the funding that comes through the Federal Highway Administration. And then the second source, of funding is through the FTA. And then you'll also see that we have different different fiscal years identified in the work program. So this first line where it says FY24 PL funding, that is the new funding that is allocated for the MPO for fiscal year 24. And then we have some rollover funding from previous years that was already identified. And so you will see that the total amount that we have budgeted in our work program for the MPO expenses is $516,000. And then there's this additional line item for $170,000, which is the VDOT state planning line item. And that goes directly through the VDOT department. So that does not come through the MPO, but that is to support MPO staff engagement, or the VDOT staff engagement with our MPO programming. So as was presented in the draft work program, what's up? Can you minimize the speaker screen on the side, Ryan? Yeah. So what was presented is what we had talked about last month, or in our last set of meetings. So we had basically we'll continue to work on the long range transportation plan. And then we had also budgeted $30,000 for the comprehensive safety action plan, which is to support additional staff engagement in the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program to develop this comprehensive safety action plan. And then we had identified some on-call services, which are intended for the MPO staff to be able to provide technical support to localities, but also one of the things that we're hoping to complete in FY24 is launching an on-call consultant program so that we could also develop opportunities for our local jurisdictions to participate if they would like to in doing a pre-procured slate of consultants that they could utilize for any of their projects.
Is that going to be a federally eligible grant?
Federally eligible grant.
Could be reimbursed under federal regulations. I know that there are probably all things you can write them up so that they you can use them to be reimbursed, use federal dollars to be reimbursed. Yes. It's one of the engineering services. I know that there's a distinction that Charlottesville and those counties had to deal with individual aspects of it, but it is if you make it federally eligible, you can use reimbursed federal dollars to get to medicine requirements within the RFP. Yeah,
that's a really interesting question. That's helpful to know. I think one of our goals is that this will meet all of the compliance requirements, so it would be eligible for any like VDOT projects or eligibility. I think some of those questions are probably things that we'll have to work out with our attorney once we sort of know what the interest is for the localities. That's kind of where we are right now, is reaching out to the localities and saying what kinds of services would be beneficial for you. But our goal, I think, would be that whatever eligibilities there's also a distinction between like the professional and non-professional services, and that's the other thing that we'll have to figure out, is whether or not this will include professional services.
And are you aiming for activities or design services? What do you think?
We'll be surveying our local governments to say what types of services would you use an on-call contract for versus contracting yourself before we set up the program.
Yeah, the Charlottesville struggle they can talk about creating an on-call contract for some time, 4 or 5 years, and have not been able to work together. So we won't do that for them. It might be a big service to them.
Sure. Yeah, and there's also very specific, I mean, there are things that we'll have to work out, specific language that has to go to the procurement to determine what kinds of services are eligible for participating jurisdictions to receive through the on-call program, and then also if there are any sort of budgetary limitations on how much those services can cost through an on-call program. So we'll have to work through all those.
And so the CSAP funds, are those in addition to the grant amount? Like, is that all going to the consultant for that?
No, this is all directly to our staff to supplement what was requested through the grant.
And legal.
And legal,
Staff
yes.
and legal to develop the program.
Yeah. But I'm glad you mentioned that, Roy, because what I wanted to show you is that we are going to request your feedback on a proposed revision to those line items. And the reason that we are requesting this revision is that as part of our coordination with VDOT specifically in the development of the comprehensive safety action plan, they have identified a need for some of their, not Michael and Chuck, but some of their district staff to participate. We need to basically identify some additional resources in order to be able to compensate them to coordinate and participate in the project. So VDOT has developed a cost estimate of approximately $13,000 for VDOT staff to participate and engage in the development of the comprehensive safety action plan. So based on having that awareness and information, what we would like to recommend, if you all are amenable to this, is revising the amounts that we are allocating to TJPDC staff in the Unified Planning Work Program from $30,000 to $43,000. So basically, we would be reducing the amount of TJPDC staff time that is covered in from the grant amount and reprogramming that into the regular work program, and then we would reduce the on-call contingency amount by $13,000.
So is this extra need because these activities weren't allowed under the grant, or was the grant just like not big enough for a big statement over budget, or?
Well, the grant was an 80-20 match, so it required a 20% match from the localities. So what we were trying to do was to maximize the amount that we could get out of the grant itself, while also minimizing how much we were reaching out to the localities to contribute. So we also programmed, I think it was $30,000 into the rural work program as well to also support this.
And in the scope of work that we wrote into the grant application, it didn't include compensation for VDOT. It did include that we would be working with them as a partner, but then we learned that it would be helpful if we could compensate their staff for being engaged in that. So we would use part of the grant to compensate them, and then use part of the UPWP to make up that gap for TJPDC staff.
Okay.
Yeah. So with all that said, this is what was advertised, and that's what's in the draft work program. And then we are requesting basically guidance from you all on whether it would be appropriate to make this adjustment. But we need a recommendation from you all today on the recommendation for the approval of the FY24 Unified Planning Work Program. And then that will go to the policy board at their meeting next Wednesday for approval.
I have another dumb question.
Yeah.
Do we have the boundary analysis in this year's work program?
We did. We were a little bit late getting that information from VDOT, and I actually don't think that that's going to be a significant amount of effort based on getting the preliminary information, but we didn't have that when we started developing the work program for FY24.
So I would information that came later.
That came like just the maps and the information from all the census information. It was already just much later than we had anticipated getting it.
Last week.
Yeah.
So that's just like rolling.
Mm-hmm.
Question, I apologize, nothing. First time either the one map is completed in the last round. We're not working on that this year.
We're not working on it as a standalone item. I mean, there probably are some ongoing places where we could continue to provide some support on it, like the RTP, TDM, and general bike ped support. We could continue to make some efforts, but our goal is that we have a completed at least initial draft to sort of wrap up that specific task. And I don't necessarily think we're planning on that being an ongoing recurring task.
So two things, and one is I went back, I missed the bike ped meetings 2 months ago, my presentation on the one map, and then I went to watch it on video, and something wrong with the link there. It doesn't have that particular meeting online, so wasn't able to view the report which you all provided on the one map. So maybe I can correct it in this March meeting of like that committee. Secondly, how are we going to prioritize multimodal stuff with the LRTP? I mean, I think one of the advantages of one map is to put down not only the existing infrastructure, the planned infrastructure on one map so we could like start to look at what the connections make sense, but maybe or corridors and bike paths in the community. And start, using that for a planning tool for multimodal. So without one map really, I mean, it got to a certain point, it pretty much showed what the infrastructure was in the county, EVA. Obviously, the city's sidewalk system is in polygons and not line data, with VDOT just recently updated cities. Bicycle facilities. But the one map sort of basically showed what I could see from that presentation. The still stuff was existing infrastructure.
Mhm.
Planned infrastructure on there.
I
guess back to this point, and one of the things we recognize is sort of a need for some sort of larger overarching plan to try to coordinate
Mhm.
two jurisdictions within the MPOs. We can do some serious multimodal planning. We're basically using the 2019 or 18 plan, and some of the projects that are coming currently being contemplated for second and third tier projects from that. So I'm just kind of curious, how are we going to accomplish the goal of one map to really help the community for prioritize facilities and really plan to move along, corridors we need to build to get one side of the community together.
Yeah, I don't know that the prioritization was actually one of the expected outcomes of the one map, at least where we are right now. I think we anticipated that it could be used as a planning tool, but not necessarily this one map project would accomplish that specific purpose. I think we're well aware that there is a need to prioritize these projects. What I would say, though, is that the city of Charlottesville is working on their own prioritization process, and then Albemarle County is also working on a multimodal plan as part of their comprehensive plan. And I think once those are completed, it might make sense for us to have a bigger conversation about the region on, where is there alignment between these, where there may be some discrepancies, and have a conversation. But I think we need to give that some due diligence to let them get through those processes first, and then we can have a regional conversation. I will say we are well aware that there's a desire and a need to do some multimodal prioritization. Some of that may be identified during the long range transportation plan, but I think we're also kind of working through what some next steps might look like. It's just not something that we can necessarily take on with what we have already planned for next year with some of these other bigger projects, but it is something that's on our list of a pipeline initiative that needs to be undertaken.
Yeah, I think that's important in large parts, because a lot of Charlottesville's prioritization really looking at very extent, not looking at citizens who might be one now. And I think in some respects the county can do the same thing. So we got this one thing, a very small community where like most citizens don't recognize how the city boundary is when they go to services in the county, they live in the city, they go to the city for service. Obviously, people in county live downtown and get so without like some sort of a longer range plan for bike facilities, multimodal facilities, I think we're in the dark. And I think fortunately it'll be interesting to see how the LRTP works. Trying to address that. So we can look at what we can do multimodal. It's interesting enough, something, I think you then put out a report a couple weeks ago. We had 10 years to really make a fundamental change for climate change. Obviously, switching to multimodal is really one thing for how to help this community, especially to get dense, also for its adding significant density with their new zoning ordinance. And I think we have a need to focus on this type of planning, and there's some sensitivity to it with climate change and the increased density in our community. So it'd be interesting to see it. Obviously, again, I missed picking that up last month, but I think we're missing an opportunity to do that. We can really get that accomplished last year with one map. I disagree. I think part of one map really was using it as a planning tool so that we could do prioritization without being able to see where the plan routes are. We can't see where plan gaps. We can't see where potential strength could happen between two jurisdictions.
I think that was the intention, but we weren't using that as the process for prioritizing.
It was part of the intent. I mean, back. So I think we missed that opportunity. I think that's what one map really was. It's supposed to be one map where not only all the existing facilities were, but the planned ones were. And sometimes facilities that people in counties had picked up yet. Because there were ideas out there that the various planning processes, maybe look at the corridor, this with a wider area. And so there were ideas out there that kicked around for years, with like activist community that still aren't on the map. And I think there are opportunities that are missing, and I think from a capital planning perspective, we're lacking having good tools to talk about regionally. What are we trying to accomplish between UVA, between the city, between the county? So I understand maybe we're not working on one map this year. I think you guys should eventually work towards, a way to tackle this. You want the regional body, the regional planning body. It means that I think it's important for you all to plan regionally multiple facilities to find fully the work that the localities are doing and find the gaps in planning. They're not working together.
And I guess I kind of missed if there was any progress on the one map. I understand it was kind of stalled, even though it was an industry report program. What's the deliverable you guys are anticipating having?
The deliverable is a combined map of all of the infrastructure facilities from all of the areas that one of the challenges that we had consistently run into was sort of the ongoing maintenance and data, like that maintaining multiple data sets, and that's been one of the challenges that we've had to resolve. So I don't know, Ryan or Curtis, do either of you want to jump in and sort of say where we are, what the deliverable will be?
Yeah, and Rory, I apologize. I think you missed a sort of update at some point at MPO Tech, but the meeting that Michael's referring to, yes, it was the March meeting, and yes, I am aware that the CTAC meeting is actually in the place of the Bike Ped meeting. I wanted to see if you would go there and see it, but yeah, you did. In March and April of last year, it was the city's request to not pursue their end any further until they had a planner in place. That was February, March, April. Ben did not arrive until November, so there was a delay there. Right now, we just met with both the city GIS folks and with, I believe, Dan Butch from the county, who's worked on it from their end. At the March meeting, the city's going to get together their staff to look over their data. They also have another GIS technician who started, so we hope to get that information. The way I would be careful to say that there's no regional bicycle and pedestrian plan in place. I mean, there is one. I mean, predates back to Mr. Will Cocklow and even before that. Plus, I know that the city does a master plan of some sorts. I know they had a bicycle pedestrian master plan of some sorts, and perhaps the county does, or has relied on maybe TJPDC's regional plan. So there is a bicycle and pedestrian plan. There are ideas in place. The scope was written to be flexible. I can't pull up the scope now. I'm not connected to the Wi-Fi, but the scope was written to be flexible, and I think it encompassed it to be a planning tool, but also allowed for expansion of ideas. From my perception, I don't see the city or even the county. Well, the county's been helpful. From, I think, the UVA standpoint, we still have to reach out to them, but I just don't see the effort really at the local level right now to move it faster than what we've already moved it so far.
Yeah, I just come back and say, agree, there is a plan from the TJPD for the whole region. I believe at the time when they were undertaking, I think a lot of the data was out there, but it was described during that process that when we're doing a regional plan, we don't have capacity to get into the fine training aspects of what's happening in the MPO. Alignments to protecting facilities, where gaps were, that kind of analysis didn't really happen. And it is, there's a lot of credit for the first plan to show both the city and counties like facilities. But it's kind of sort of like it goes to spaghetti, we throw everything at the wall. There's not much rhyme or reason. I know that there was a analysis that went behind it, where they sort of rank things based on sort of criteria. It doesn't really seem to have a strategy towards it, where we really try to move people from one side of the metropolitan area to the other. It doesn't sort of seem to identify what corridors out there. But it doesn't really seem to like create an underlying strategy for both the city and the county, or was trying to build something bigger than there's a series of bike ped trails that are all over the place. I mean, I noticed one of the things like the city parks departments working on some trails right now. That are, you know, places we're talking about having bike facilities, and they're putting them 4 foot wide. They're saying the contractor come in with a plan for 4 foot wide. They can be in places and Mountain Hills, the bike facility. And that doesn't show up in on plan. It's like it's hard to fixate on something that we're really trying to work on as a community. We don't have a good plan. Again, one map in concept was supposed to be not only existing facility, which it seems like we got to through all effort. I appreciate that, but it doesn't show the potential. But I can tell on there. Maybe I'm missing something in the thing, but I don't see the underlying aspect, and I don't know what outputs.
I was just gonna ask, related to this, are you suggesting that we not recommend the UPWP and that there are amendments that you want to recommend to the policy board?
Well,
Because I'm kind of curious, relating to this, you don't see one map, but is there something that you're suggesting relating to this work plan that needs to change, that should come out?
I don't know if I can tell you exactly what you should take out, put in. I'm just trying to emphasize the fact that we don't have a very good prioritized regional.
I think
Let's try to make that facilities. And I don't see how we do that, the farming transportation plan, by using what the city may come out with for their model.
Yeah,
Or what the county would work on. I don't understand how they work together.
I want to really clearly acknowledge that we understand that we just can't do everything all at one time. So that is something that we're aware needs to happen at some point. I think we have a pretty big workload already going into next year with things that we, you know, are kind of committed to carrying out, either because we're required to, or because we have a big grant that, you know, we just signed an agreement with. So I think this is on our radar, though, as something that needs to come up soon, but probably this next fiscal year is not the time for us to undertake it.
And then, so I know Ben is undertaking an effort to really get all of those city level plans together and up to date, because a lot of them are really aging. So it might make sense for integration of that new updated stuff into the current one map of existing facilities to happen after the city has gotten its ducks in a row. Maybe it's something to think about for FY25 then.
I mean, that's where I would be happy, is that I think we need to come back and have a renewed focus on how two systems are going to work together. How can people live in Greenbrier, get county, live in county, get downtown, UVA. Needs to be on one map. We need to try and figure out, oh, this is the corridor we need to go on. Then we can go into jurisdiction.
Part of that should be then city. I think they have one that data, so they can be looking at that of this data. This stuff that you're doing their plan.
Yeah, it seems to me if you guys are giving a deliverable in usable, editable GIS format, the city could kind of unilaterally start adding its proposed facilities to that without the MPO staff having to do work program. I don't know that we have the GIS capacity to do that, but maybe it would be helpful for them then, in doing this funding to
And that's the thing, that's really what we've been trying to do for years. We still can't get the GIS to work together. So anyhow, it seems like a fundamental problem that we should try and solve the two systems are working together, we have a long range plan. And so I'll drop it right there, but just to underline that not this year for the land, we didn't seem to quite get to what that larger goal was supposed to be the last year.
Let me ask Bill, so Bill, is there anybody working on that to get this to get us better? Well, my understanding is, this whole process, we came up with what we learned really quickly was, getting the existing data into a singular format with a data model that we perseverated many years, come up with an adequate data model. And then it was up to the 3 jurisdictions to provide their data in that data model, which UVA did. Then there's, it's kind of a comedy of errors. There was lots of GIS capability, we just lost the GIS capability of the these rely on. And so there was really no place for that data to live and create this one map as an online tool, which is the ultimate vision, where you could have like this, you could see all the intermodal and multimodal stuff. You could see the planning layers. We felt there was some discussion of how much we should have looked for that versus, let's use it internally. All that stuff, but that's all I assume there's an
We're getting into this time road study. City University interface is right there, but I can tell you, how the systems that are in the university, the ones that are in the county or in the city, work that
What does that mean?
I don't understand, like, there's not a way, maybe I should say, we figure out what the county's plans, like the desires are, their plan, respect, UVAs in the city, all come right together.
So I think the one map idea is all that be able to get that, be able to visually see it or it's the plan project, it's not or plan project, it's kind of a project, stuff like that. And then there's an ongoing maintenance aspect to it, which we're just provide once you got up and running, we provide it's that, we're just not there yet.
Yeah, and I will say too, Bill, and I have seen the GIS files. I think I'm probably the one that's worked with it the most at the MPO level. I think what the county and UVA have done has looked pretty decent. There are some attributes that are missing in the files, but even with the UVA, some of their data is different. So for example, they've got bicycle lanes on the side of the roads for some of the shape files, and then bike facilities that are part of the center lane. And so there are multiple layers of things that need to be worked out. But I think that we are heading in that direction, as sort of Bill's alluding to.
So maybe, in terms of what we're talking about here, it seems like if there is some funding, because we don't, this is all priority, right? We don't money into it, we should priority. And I think what I'm hearing is that there should be more of a priority on this issue, and if there's at least working through some of the technical challenges that seem to be impediments for us to actually use this as a planning tool. We may have the existing conditions, and I don't know how up to date those are. Maybe they're not more. But it seems like if there's some way of putting some funding into, again, I couldn't even begin to tell you guys would know better than any of us, probably, where you could allocate some funds to at least work through those technical challenges that are out there. Because I don't know, the county doesn't have, that I've seen, a clear path to this either. So if there's some money put into that to continue to at least move it forward, even if it's not just wait a whole year to mobile tackle in 2005, and then 2005 we're just going to be that much further out of date with the existing data, and then start tackling these technical issues. Or maybe you have other ways of dealing with it.
I think we could generally include ongoing discussions about it with the bike ped, like this general line item right there could support, maybe not as targeted of an initiative, but ongoing like discussions and coordination with it in preparation. What I think needs to be communicated though is that we have a very highly skilled GIS person on our staff right now that has been sort of providing a lot of guidance based on their experience in both localities that are in this region, as well as sort of understanding the ongoing like management of the system that has been really providing a lot of suggestions and feedback into this process. So this isn't just a discussion about, we want to just cross it off a list. This is based on what we're hearing based on her experience and expertise, as far as we could go through a lot of this and create a lot of alignment and have a separate data set that we manage. But the problem is that these data sets aren't necessarily being held specifically by a formal department at the agency. So then we're creating another data set that has to be managed separately, and that can create a lot of confusion. So one of the things that we're doing is, as we're developing this one map, we're developing it with an eye toward how can we provide for the ongoing maintenance and update without having to consistently dedicate a large amount of staff resources towards that. So that's one of the things that we're considering. So we can continue to have these conversations and prepare for it, but I want you all to understand that we are having those internally, and they're very well-informed discussions about how we're undertaking the One Map initiative.
So I mean, that makes sense to me, right? That the idea should be to, have a tool that integrates the data and can pull updates, ideally, live publish updates from each of the localities. So I guess my question is, what is the deliverable you guys are delivering, right? Like, so it's a draft map of existing conditions, but like, are we talking about a PDF? Or are we talking about an open data portal with all of these things tied together?
Yeah, I think the idea would be that the data would be, I don't know, Ryan. I think the idea would be like, we could provide the open data. We won't, I don't know about the actual map interface on our website, but it could be something that's downloaded and pulled into under other interfaces.
And if the data's there, I mean,
Yeah.
people could make that map interface. You get like AUV and can do it. I can do it.
Yeah.
Right?
And we could also like regularly publish PDF versions of those along with the data, for example. But I think the idea is really like the combined data set
Okay.
as the deliverable. Is that consistent?
So if the data sets are out there, then the localities can each add to it. And that won't be an issue that requires work program.
I mean, that's our goal. Yeah, is to identify like how there's also this process in GIS. Bill, you can probably talk to this more than I could, or Michael, maybe, where you have to like identify locations where they like snap together so you can make sure everything is aligned. So it'll just be those kinds of things.
Yeah, you lose what we start getting out of like the levels, like really lining up with what's on the ground. You need that. The end goal would be handheld device. It's going to be too much for that. I knew it were, but planning scheme. And just keep coming back. Planning scheme. Show me with the board makes somebody say, I don't know, what board that trying to go to state tops or downtown. How are they supposed to get there? How are we trying to get these people to our community? I don't know if we have a solid plan. The aspiration here, but you start talking about that from the board. And so anyhow, about this, but I think it's something that we need to come back to. I don't know, maybe we need to level of city and county, try and do a bit of a job planning. I know you guys are trying to get your house in order, which I appreciate. You got a lot of turnover things, but at the end of the day, we got to find the projects that will be transformational in our community, and our track record is not great at this point, either finding projects or not managing.
I mean, I'd say the city's defense, they're the only ones who really are publishing useful data sets online and continuously updated format right now. And so I'm definitely much more interested in you guys getting something published that is usable and updatable than in working on defining things. So does this bike lane match up exactly with that bike lane? Because from the 10,000 foot view, doesn't really matter that much, right?
Sure.
So is the idea that that's going to be done in this year's work program with the current scale?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Is that accurate, Ryan, Coda? Yeah,
Thank you. Do we ever need it?
All right, so do we have any other discussion on the draft work program or recommendation with adjustments? Your motion to recommend with this adjustment. Here's a second. Right. And just like for Bill, all in favor? Say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That's unanimously. All right, next up on our list are tip amendments for our drafts.
do you want me to keep sharing or do you want to
Yeah.
share from there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wait, wait.
Yeah, so in your packet, you have draft amendments for the FY 21-24 Transportation Improvement Program. Traffic and safety operations, preventative maintenance for bridges, and preventative maintenance and systems preservation. These are all part of that group project, that group listing. This slide here shows the traffic and safety operations. As you can see, the old table shows about $4 million. That increases up to $6 million. Second amendment, approximately 16 million for maintenance for bridges. That's increased to approximately 21 million. And then lastly, preventative maintenance and system preservation from 44 million to 55 million. Those are the three amendments that VDOT has informed the MPO that need to be made for our MPO tip. The hope is that the tech committee and the CTAC committee make a recommendation to the policy board to approve the amendments. Policy board is scheduled to approve it at their May meeting. From a staff perspective, I think we have no issues. This is just a matter of moving funding into calendar year or fiscal year 23, I believe.
Oh, then we're moving to fiscal year 22, though, right? How is that?
Yeah, I might have to defer to Michael and Chuck, but yeah, from my understanding, this was a reallocation of funds in 23, but
But federal districts.
we are in federal fiscal, that's referring to federal fiscal years.
All right, any comments? You got any?
Yeah, just Ryan, I looked through this yesterday. There's a couple of, I think, obvious errors in here. I noticed. I talked to Chuck about it. We haven't had a chance to go do it, fine tooth comb, but like some of the UPC numbers are wrong. I don't, do you, well, we can talk about it later. Just let you know, we follow up with you next day or so, I guess. But again, things I'm noticing like UPC numbers and stuff like that, all in some of the boxes, so not quite sure what areas it may be.
And the tip amendments are in the new tip.
Page 26 or the page 60 of the PDF document.
That's on the next item.
Yeah, that's the new tip.
Didn't recommend it there.
Well, I can get you on that one too. I think, sorry, let's go on.
All right, do we have a motion to recommend approval of these amendments? Give a second. All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that passed unanimously, and then we go to the draft tip.
yeah, so included in your packet is a draft 24-27 tip. It includes one interstate project, 2 primary, 2 secondary, 3 urban, and 5 groupings. It also includes CAT and junk information. Also in the tip, we've got the adopted 2023 MPO or state performance targets and measures. The MPO has adopted those. This tip is based off of the current long-range plan. As you are aware, there is an effort for 2050. Job program, I guess Ted or Zadie isn't here, but in this draft, you will see John information, but we were informed by John that they will be revising their capital plan over the next several months, and that was probably about 2 months ago. So they're somewhere in that process. So what's shown for John may be amended shortly. As I said, the policy board is set. We're scheduled to approve the draft 24-27 tip, as well as the amendments to the 21-24. No public comments have been received as of yesterday. I do need to check my email and voicemail for today. And then the recommendation would be for this committee to recommend that the policy board adopt the 24-27 tip. The next slides, basically, I just, in fact, I apologize, I didn't upload the newer slides, but I do have the tip broken down, but if need be, we can go to the website and look at it. Specific projects if you have questions. Now, Michael, your comment about the UPC numbers, was that related to the draft 24-27 or was that to the 21-24?
It goes to the draft 24-27.
Okay.
So I'll follow up. I apologize.
How many were there that you said?
Let me just do this offline. They may be subscriber errors, something that makes it became long through the blocks. Just see if there's an example, there's a UBC number there or doesn't exist for project. So it's the industry project. So something's a little bit squirrely.
Okay, I just want to know if it was 1 or 50, but yeah. So if you all have specific questions about the tip, I'll try to answer them.
Just a little question, there's a bunch of projects in here that are like finished, we can close out and still a lot of money program for next fiscal year. What's the deal with that? Is that just left over that we program?
Some of these things, they keep money on it while they're waiting until it's out. I really aspects. Sometimes it just takes a really long time to close out projects.
Fair enough.
Where that money is, and it's not, it won't be reprogrammed. Yeah.
Not getting money back.
You're not getting that.
All right, do any other comments or questions? We hear a motion to recommend approval of this draft tip.
So moved.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, got a motion and a second, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Extensions. All right, next up, smart scale.
I got out of order and where I thought things were going. Okay. So most of you all are familiar at this point with the smart scale process. Just as a refresher, this is the state's process for selecting. This is kind of the opportunity to get your big transportation projects funded. Applications are submitted biannually. So round 6 is going to be submitted in August of next year. But because we like to be proactive and make sure we have well-vetted projects, we are starting to develop our project applications for round 6 now. That said, the CTB has not officially approved which projects from round 5 will be funded. I think the draft 6-year improvement program with the CTB recommendations will be reviewed at their meeting, I think it's next week, and then that will be approved in June. So we are making some assumptions about what projects will be funded in round 5 at this point, and we may need to go back and have conversations if those assumptions are incorrect. Based on the previous rounds, the MPO is able to submit up to 4 projects. And in order for the MPO to submit projects, we have to meet these eligibility requirements, which means that all projects need to meet a need that is identified in the state's transportation plan called VTrans, that for MPOs specifically, projects either need to be along a corridor of statewide significance, or they need to be a project that has a benefit to the regional network, which is defined in the state's transportation plan. So last meeting, we talked a little bit about how we are in a different phase of development as far as projects. And while we had adopted a process for round 5 that included some significant engagement and project application development prior to the applications, that may not make sense at this point, because we do not have this long list of projects ready to queue up. We're working on developing our next set of priorities. And so what we had suggested is that instead of picking 1 or 2 projects for the MPO staff to focus on extensively, that we provide some ongoing support for the development of new projects through the VDOT pipeline projects that they have been identified. We'll talk about those more in a minute. And then look at whether or not there are some additional scoping or revision opportunities for previously submitted projects that we had identified that were high priorities, but we had not been successful in implementing yet. So what I did to develop this slate of projects for us to be discussing as far as what we may want to move forward into the development of a round 6 smart scale application was looking at the high priority projects that were not funded in previous rounds, and then also looking at what projects we may not have submitted yet that have been developed through some of these pipeline or corridor studies. And so this list is the one that I came up with that would indicate where we might have some opportunities to submit round 6 projects. The District Avenue roundabout at Hydraulic Road, it actually scored fairly well. I don't know that there would need to be any scope adjustments, but this may be a project that we want to consider to submit.
Sandy, for
Yeah.
that one, I believe that Kevin and stuff with Leon
Mhm.
to switch it. That's really that.
Well, I wasn't sure if that was public information yet, so.
Wow, that. Be honest with you, I walked around.
Yeah, I think it's moving down.
Well, that's now, so.
We're meeting in like the world, and I was like, okay.
Gotcha.
If it was meant to be private then, I'm very confused now.
We'll keep our eye on that one.
There's talk.
Okay.
One of those 50 layers.
It was Peter Jefferson, Peter Cut, and Mark Brown.
Yeah.
That is,
It did score fairly high, and just,
yeah, he board member, I think. Yeah, I think I actually did.
Okay.
I wouldn't have said it instead, but probably not what we needed.
I don't think I'm shot on one.
Right.
I get a very angry phone call.
No,
Well,
Um,
there you go, new information. So maybe we'll keep an eye on that one and see what happens with that one. The 5th Street Extended Multimodal Improvement Project, if you all recall, this is looking at some intersection improvements at the intersection of 5th Street and 5th Street Extended, where into the Wegmans Shopping Center, and maybe forget exactly what the scope was, but maybe removing some left turn lanes and redirecting traffic into the other shopping center, the Food Lion Shopping Center across the road. This project did not score very well, but I think at least my read is that improvements along 5th Street continue to be a fairly significant priority for the community. And so one recommendation may be to review what was submitted in round 5 and determine if there's a way to reduce the scope of that project to try to reduce the overall project cost, to resubmit that as maybe either looking more specifically at the intersection improvements or at some of the multimodal improvements through that intersection. Yeah, did you have a question, Rory?
Yeah, I was going back and looking at that a few weeks ago, and the typical sections didn't have bike lanes where there are bike lanes now. There's no shared use path. It seemed to me that project was like two the whole time.
They were, I think if I recall, they were removing the existing bike lanes and they were going to create a was it a 10-foot wide shared use path or an 8-foot wide shared use path?
Oh, okay, it's labeled sidewalks. So I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a technical definition that the city uses that might be different than what VDOT uses.
Gotcha.
So, but it was intended to be both bicycles. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
There's an example.
sure. Yep. 100%.
Yeah, it was put in as sidewalk for VDOT's scoring process for their ranking methodology.
Does that make it more expensive? Because concrete is more expensive than that?
I don't know about that. I question that because throughout that process, I wanted to verify with Chuck that to be sure that this was going to be 8-foot asphalt path. Yeah, so.
All right.
And I was assured by Chuck that that was going to happen, but of course you see where the project's at, but.
All right.
Um,
This is one I should have asked that question 2 years ago.
now you know. There was a project that scored pretty well that was part of the US 250 pipeline project that VDOT worked on last year. This was this US 250 Rolkin Road pedestrian improvements. This was basically to facilitate pedestrian crossing on 3 different sides of that intersection, and then to extend a sidewalk along 250 between Rolkin Road and what's the next road? State Farm. State Farm. So this one is in green because it scored pretty well. It would be fairly simple to resubmit it. However, I don't know that it has been identified by the county as a very high priority. And it also doesn't have that same sort of nexus where there's a strong benefit to both Charlottesville and Albemarle, but it is a project that would be fairly straightforward to resubmit. And then we have a couple of VDOT pipeline projects that we could also consider. So VDOT has 2 pipeline projects that are currently about to kick off or will be underway in order to prepare or identify projects that could potentially be submitted as part of round 6. The first one is the US 250 and Barracks Road interchange, looking at some improvements there that will likely just be, I think, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the expectation that will just result in one project recommendation. And then there's a section of Ivy Road that includes the US 250 interchange that is also being reviewed. And there could be multiple projects that are identified out of that pipeline study. Is that accurate, Michael?
Well, we're just starting the project.
Sure.
So who knows exactly what will come.
Sure.
Finally.
Yeah.
And it could well be the very multiple ones. I think you're right in assuming that Ivy Road probably will be potentially. There's a lot of issues out there, so it could be multiple projects.
Yeah.
But it's too early.
Sure. And then there was one project that was identified in a previous VDOT pipeline project, which was looking at the North 29 area. So this is the Boulders Road Briarwood intersection, which is the intersection that goes into, oh gosh, what's that big development? With the
Military?
Yeah.
The Ravenna station?
Yeah, Ravenna Station. It's the intersection that provides access to Ravenna Station. So there were potentially some recommendations that were developed as far as that study is concerned, including potentially looking at a modified signal or an R-cut at that development. So that's also a project that we could spend a little bit of time working on to determine what the preferred project maybe, and developing that application. So that really is intended to be the slate of projects that we will be considering for application development. Obviously, if there's any adjustments in what projects are funded by the CTB for round 5, we could certainly go back and look at those projects. And we also have to consider that there could be changes to the Smart Scale program. We know that we've been able to submit 4 projects each round before, but there could be some adjustments to that program.
Did the MPO submit the wrong road one last time? For the TJPC?
The TJPDC submitted it, yeah.
Seems like more. It's a lot kind of project, but I think it's a good one, but.
Yeah, sure.
I'll tell you now.
Yeah, well, those 4 TJPDC slots can be supporting any jurisdiction's application. So it could be a Nelson or a Green,
Yeah.
doesn't need to be.
And the MPO ones are supposed to be more intended for things that affect both.
That's typically how they've been selected, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking it wasn't, you know, last time,
Mhm.
but, okay. I do have, I know that the memo talked about suggestions,
Mhm.
I do kind of have one.
Okay.
I think it might be easiest if I join the Zoom and share my screen here.
Sure.
I need permission. So, exactly in the RTP, but it's kind of a deficiency that I see in the hydraulic project we're kind of undertaking now. So, you know, right now we have this pretty nearly complete bike network from downtown to the 29 area, right? You go up Shanks Branch, you have to get to the baseball field, but you cut through McIntyre Park, you got the trails back there, short stint on Grove, and then we have the new shared use path all the way down 250. And then we have Hillsdale all the way up and soon to be Toronto, right? But there's this gap here from the top of Whole Foods to the 250 trail, and the new VDOT project will extend this shared use path to Brandywine. And that's where it'll stop. So there'll still be this, it's about a 1,500 foot gap here, I think, depending on where you go. I think the Meadow Creek Bridge is probably a constraint. I don't know if you have a room to really get across it. And so I expect that this might end up being a very expensive gap to fill, probably to the point of it being worth a smart scale project. Putting on my inner Barnes hat here, and this, I mean, to me, this is like the most critical gap in this whole big system we built, where like the county is looking to put hundreds of units at Seagull Oriental. You know, we have a big project potentially coming into Seminole Square. All of those people could get to downtown in like literally 15 minutes, but they can't. Well, they can on the sidewalk in big ways.
So, I'm City Thunder. Yeah, it's just part of the bundle, the city would like, you know, for the hydraulic one, it's been funded, they can work on the design bill.
Yep.
And you just right identified the shared use path along 250, was proposed to come down to Brandywine.
Yep.
We were directed in a quarterly meeting with the city to look at this change order, Thomas and the city came back from public hearing for things like this. This has been, so the city wants to add a change order to make that connection from Brandywine to at least to Mickey Drive.
Okay.
So we are looking at that right now. And of course, the city is working on some of the extended shared use path, Mickey Drive up to Greenbrier Drive.
Yep.
That was sort of parallel hills there. So that connection we made, you know, I mean, I would direct you back to, there's still 2 gaps in there that haven't been filled. Those are the ones that, I know the Parks Department has plans that probably date back to the mid-teens, or the gap between where the whale tail was. And there's 2 gaps in this trail system you're talking about.
Okay.
That are behind the firehouse.
Yeah.
And gaps haven't been addressed for. I think we're working on probably about 10, 15 years now.
Yeah.
That might be a better place to look if you're actually looking to try. You know, they're looking for something that might plug a gap. Okay, there are two gaps that the city's been working on, have rough plans. I think they spent some money on some engineering, but they've never come to fruition.
And that would be below level start. Usually it's happening. Yeah, I mean, to me, that gap is less critical. I mean, I scooted up to Central Square a few weeks ago, get to telegraph comics, actually it was easier than I thought. You know, this part is pretty low stress if you go through the CHS connector and Grove Road. Grove Road's not too bad. It's really hydraulic, but it's absolutely brutal. But I mean, if we can get to make a drive, you still have this gap here.
The problem,
But I mean,
there's not a lot of room between Whole Foods and the curb.
yeah, no doubt.
And actually with the Crazy Horse green printer, that's a real problem, you know, right away. They got some HVAC units in the way, so
Yep.
that one's problematic.
Yeah.
But
All right,
good news, we're looking at trying to close that gap that hasn't been.
Okay, great. Yeah, and for solving the Meadow Creek problem, that seemed like the biggest part to me, where we potentially need a new bridge. So, all right, I guess I will withdraw this.
Great idea, Roy. Any other feedback or additional projects to add for the list or for consideration?
That would be. Is that, I mean, that's true, right? Like, to connect that hydraulic gap really gets you to downtown, but a lot of the people potentially living there would probably be UPA or you can't get down there. So a project that would connect, you know, up Meadow Creek Drive. I remember you going in Meadow Brook. Meadow Road and then get across 250, right? That would be true. If that were talking about here.
I think for the purposes of the MPO, like, we're not going to be able to provide a lot of technical support to develop these applications. So it's really the idea of taking something from a conceptual state
Yep.
to develop it into a project application with support from VDOT. So I think typically what we have done, and I think what I've heard from the policy board, is they would prefer that we move forward project application development for projects that already have had some sort of public engagement. We just need to like work on sort of better defining the scope. But I think if there's some work that's already been developed, we could potentially undertake that. Otherwise, it might be a project that we need to identify as something to plan for.
Yeah.
What it's worth, the city did do a study, Steve. AMT did the work for them that showed it was a planning study that led to the second phase of the Emmett Street project, that their third or fourth phase may have built in the spot, but again, you know, we have one map, maybe we could see what those projects were, studies that were done, but anyhow.
So is that, you know, where does that conceptualization happen, right? Is that in the LFTP process? Is that?
Yeah, no, the conceptualization would probably happen either. So what would happen in the LRTP process is we would potentially identify needs where there's no like identified solution, and that would sort of help us determine what our planning priorities need to be in order to help consistently develop that pipeline. But it could come from a number of sources. It could come from a corridor study. It could come from a small area plan. It could come from a feasibility study that the localities undertake. I mean, we've had projects developed through all of those different channels that we've been able to move forward. I don't think in terms of the MPO's capacity, we have the resources to be able to take a project from conceptualization to project application in one round is really what I'm driving at. Yeah.
Okay, so we're really stuck with the list that we have then.
Until the LRTP.
And until we start developing our next pipeline of projects, which is one of the things that we're working on right now. Yeah.
And do we have like a list of things in LRTP that we haven't kind of brought up for potential consideration here?
Yeah, we've actually worked through most of the, we've actually worked through all of the constrained projects, so all of the high priority projects. I went through and reviewed the projects with the localities and the long range transportation plan that were on the vision list. A lot of those are being undertaken by local initiatives specifically for, you know, Charlottesville is addressing a lot of those, from what my understanding, based on some of their local priorities. And then the other ones, some of them are like really visionary, like what's the new connector, the Eastern Connection Road from Sunset to, oh my gosh.
That's spontaneous.
Yeah, to Fontaine, yeah, like that one probably is not going to be a strong candidate.
Yeah.
Or there's and there were some recommendations along Rio Road, and when I talked to the county, they felt like it was a little premature to be discussing those at this point.
Yeah. All right, yeah, I mean, I think there are some county applications from last year also, like, you know, the Avon Street, multimodal stuff,
Mhm.
they're not the thing funded. So this is sort of more on the county side.
Oh, yeah.
Or probably maybe more.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
mean, I also say, I said that before, and I'll say it again, the Ravenna Bridge alignment is. It's the wrong alignment, right? Like, this committee voted unanimously, including the county representatives, to support the other potential alignment. The cost was way lower. I think we saw that reflected in the VDOT estimate. And we can keep pouring money and effort into this alignment that won't really be useful for Pantops commuting to job centers, except for Woolen Mills, where Willow Tree mostly doesn't have people go to the offices. I understand for my Willow Tree friends. And I think we should open that back up to be looked at. Clearly policy in the past disagreed, but I would have thought that price tag would have humbled them a little bit.
Well, we will find out about our raise grant application at the end of June, so maybe I'll have an update for you at our next meeting. Yeah. Gotcha. Any other feedback? We're not asking for a commitment right now, just trying to finalize sort of the list of potential projects for consideration.
And to be clear, you guys are talking about VDOT doing the work on this, like, I mean, you're talking about studying, you're really talking about VDOT helping develop the concept, right? With the work we, just to be clear, we haven't talked about that.
You mean for the project? Yeah, I mean, I would assume the same kind of support that VDOT has provided for the other project development. Yeah. Which is another reason to consider the technical development of the projects to the point that they're at now.
I guess last thing I say is that barracks project or the pipeline study and whatever project came out of it seemed to me to be extremely worthwhile.
Yeah.
And probably should be prioritized.
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, I think I got what I needed, so thank you all. Do you want me to keep going, Rory?
Yeah, any other thoughts? Barry, you ready to say something?
No. I mean, what's the rate
So back then we were looking at two alignments. One was to Chesapeake Street, which would then have a straight shot to downtown versus the Woolen Mills alignment that lets you out on Broadway and facilities. Speaking of which, I mean, maybe putting facilities on Broadway would be a worthwhile project, and they did do that plan there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more of an economic development plan, so I don't know how much they look at the streetscape, but
Yeah, I know that we just, we're starting, not me, specifically, but we're going to look at Broadway, the more features and things and stuff, so. I'm pretty sure. They're on for the downtown, but I know that, we're out there to the back. Yeah, meeting with people on that way up, and like. What kind of things they want to see as well. There's planning for, I guess it's. Probably the lead thing or something.
Yeah.
So that's happening in the background.
yeah, and I think that's worthwhile, regardless of whether the bridge goes there. If we are going to double down on the bridge going there, then I think that's critical.
Yeah.
And I guess beyond the two alignments we talked about previously, I heard it floated, that a third alignment, to sort of much closer to Free Bridge, through almost the zero east high site, that's being proposed for development right now, which could actually get into the food line, and all of, access all of western Pantops without doubling back. Would be worthwhile, or did we ever study that last time?
I don't think, I think that was outside of the defined project scope last time, like that was outside of the area. I wasn't really closely involved at the very beginning, but there was like a mile radius, I think that was identified, saying we want to bridge somewhere in the circle, and I think that probably was outside the circle. I think really anything related to the Ravenna Bridge would be sort of at the direction of the policy board, though.
And the race grant is very specifically on
Yeah.
this line.
Yes.
Well, sounds good. All right, well. Please give your thoughts on that.
I mean, we don't. Hopefully.
You hope they what?
Then it was a different one.
The Chesapeake one or something?
I don't know what.
The one we referencing more far up the road? If you can hear you guys talk about this. Yeah, I think it should be up there too. I mean, interestingly, if we're gonna talk about it, the city's got a shared use path down the Mead Park. There's an old abandoned paper right away that leads all the screen on Mead Park, and the property you're talking about. And then you can stop around right across the river there, you're right to the shopping center.
Yeah, and it seems to me that, I guess the original idea was that it would be far from the Free Bridge. As if the Free Bridge was like a viable bike ped facility in the first place. Which,
I use it. Manageable.
Yeah, I think the idea was that there were 3 different locations where there was an identified desire for a bicycle and pedestrian bridge, and they felt like the one at the southern end kind of provided the most utility as far as being both a recreational resource and a transportation resource. I think very high level, that's my understanding of why they scoped that the way that they did.
The original document, if you look at it, it basically covered River View Park.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I get it. It just seems to me that when your price tag comes in at 3 times what you expected and gonna elbow out all the other potential projects we want, if it does get funded, like. And it was the least useful for actual transportation purposes rather than recreation, that we should like. Open it back up a little bit and look at our options.
I think well, right now it's not moving, so.
Yeah,
Just for that alone, we should think. Whether it's just the price of what you're doing at that location, or is there a more affordable location that might actually provide you more usability as well.
yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like policy is, are the ones who want to keep doubling down over and over on this. Full mills alignment, so. You could speak to your people, I can speak to mine. Certainly no promises.
Yeah, I mean, it never went to the. planning commission.
It's sorry,
It didn't go to the planning commission,
yeah, it didn't get ours either,
which I
yeah.
Yeah,
I think it would be worthwhile to give an update to the planning commission on these potential projects.
Say to that point, do MPO submitted smart scale projects ever go to the planning commission?
I think it's 60% design, maybe?
There were planning
Yeah, but not in
commission.
this Initial, yeah, no, it wouldn't have been.
There were
part of
planning
normal
commissioners that were
process.
invited to be on like the meeting, like
So
the stakeholder meeting.
Stakeholder committee,
Mhm.
and we were on the MPO Technical Committee.
Right.
Don't do this alignment, and the stakeholder committee said, don't do this alignment, except for one person who didn't want the cars parked in front of her house. And then the elected said, do this alignment. And then
Mhm.
VDOT said,
it doesn't have to go for approval, planning commission doesn't approve anything anyway, right, just makes recommendations. But as a working session, at least, I think, for something that's this meaningful and important, for both city and county. You would think that having a joint work session might make sense.
yeah, I think it would be very useful to just get a presentation and have a short discussion, because at least the electeds, at least for our plan commissions, their sessions, they're usually joint and there's counselors there. In theory, maybe they pay attention to us, we hope, or pretend. Whereas honestly, this committee, I feel like we're shouting into the void, and they're not hearing, and even the state committee, they're not hearing what they're saying. They're just hearing, well, the mills being able to affect economic development subsidies to that area. Let's build a $50 million bridge there.
I wrote down work sessions with the planning commission.
I'm
Gotcha.
Yeah,
I mean, to me, one of the things is. Sorry, I'm hoping to move back up. One map, you have an idea where you're trying to serve the whole neighborhood. And how you want to really get folks who are in handoffs to downtown destination. A map that sort of starts talking about the alternative, you may be able to find one that maximizes transportation, using transportation dollars to get that done. When we work on these corridors, we work on small area land, sometimes we lose the trees in the forest here. I just don't think we're having a big enough perspective on a lot of these things. It's like, we have different ones that are coming from Wire trying to get to downtown, say the shopping, the small square, the shopping center at Rio and 29. Maybe Rio is the best way to do that. Maybe it's not, but when you go Rio corridor study, that becomes a high priority. We're not looking at it in the context of maybe you can come down Hillsdale, cut the tunnel on the railroad, pick up the John Warren Parkway. I mean, that is car-free, in the woods, very flat way to connect major centers. We don't have a regional look at what we want to do on things. I think we miss opportunities. I think that's why this great projects are to, it's really too far downstream to be unused. It doesn't serve the northern half of Pantox. We're making people live. It's a huge investment out there. We're trying to vote it downtown.
Pretty much just with a big empty old state farm. And you can get some big sugar there.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make this beat up of the staff today. But it does.
but it does what? I'm sorry.
It does come to all of us. How do we?
This was a decision of the policy board, not staff.
Well, staff picked the location for I sat in the meeting when we picked these first projects. And it was very narrowly focused. It was a bridge down Riverview Park, and it was one on Route 20 South. And the other option that was thought of at that time was the city Sherry's path and along the bypass from the rescue squad to Free Bridge. That one got shot down, but the other two got picked up. It comes back prior to the project and seeing a bigger picture. Really, what we need to be doing with this community. And that's not all we do.
All right, any other thoughts on that note? We should go to the moving toward 2050, where we're going to solve all these problems and the unified vision.
Yeah. So I wanted to first of all, so I want to preface this by saying that, last time we looked at the lenses goal or the goals and objectives, and we got some stakeholder feedback about those and made some proposed revisions. And then based on the feedback we've gotten from the MPO committees from CTAC and you all, as well as kind of starting to work through the public engagement and the survey instruments, we made some additional revisions. So I'm going to go through what those revisions are, and then we'll talk about our public engagement. But I really want us all to be keeping in mind that the goal after we have this next set of meetings is that we'll be ready to start with our public engagement next month, so we can start getting some information and start working through the process of prioritizing our projects and identifying where our priority system needs are. So the couple of revisions that we made is that as we were developing this different framework, thinking about, we have these goals and objectives, and it was really getting really difficult to communicate within the goals and objectives how important some of these different frameworks were. We decided to adopt this system of developing a set of lenses. So these are intrinsic frameworks that are kind of overriding how we consider all of our goals and objectives. So they're not necessarily going to be clearly communicated within the language of the goals and objectives, but they're so important that we're saying that this is a lens that we're viewing all of these from. So we had started with identifying climate action and equity as two lenses. And then as we were talking about this, we thought it made a lot of sense to also add quality of life as a lens, since the purpose of establishing a safe and efficient and accessible transportation system is really to improve the quality of life for the people who need to use it and rely on it. The second change we made was related to economic development. We struggled kind of to know exactly how to integrate economic development with this plan for the reason that we think it's important. It's a national goal, but it didn't seem to be a major priority as far as planning transportation. It felt like economic development is important, but it was hard to really sort of identify what the most appropriate nexus was to consider economic development priorities as far as planning. So we kind of went back and looked at the identified metrics that we were planning to use and looking at what maybe made the most sense for things to be grouped together. And so originally we had grouped economic development with the land use piece. And after thinking about how economic development improvements are captured like at the national level, we thought it might make sense more to group that with efficiency, which is really related to freight movement. So I think there's an argument to be made either way. Before we had it grouped with the land use, which I think there's an economic development argument to make that if you have a community where things are close together and accessible to each other, there's that could be an economic development argument, or there's this argument that really moving goods and people through a transportation system efficiently is economic development. So we made the adjustment to put economic development with efficiency. That made sense to us at the time, but would be happy to hear feedback you all may have on that. And then we also changed the land use goal language in order to better clarify what it is we were trying to capture when we were talking about how we were considering land use and evaluating transportation system priorities. So the revised language is that the land use goal is to connect community destinations in a manner that aligns with local growth management priorities. And then the new language for the efficiency and economic development goal is to efficiently and reliably move people and goods through the multimodal transportation system. And then as far as communicating sort of how all of this fits together, I think some of the arrows were going to the wrong places in this table that was in the memo, so I apologize for that. But we created this line graph that kind of shows the interconnection. I think one of the things that was really challenging to communicate is that some of these objectives are really supporting more than one goal. So for example, if we're talking about improving the operational efficiency of a system, that is improving efficiency because it's improving how transportation systems are able to move efficiently through their networks, but it also has an environmental impact by reducing congestion and reducing emissions. So this graphic was really intended just to communicate the interrelatedness of all of these different factors and to show how there's some subjectivity into how it's all grouped. But ultimately, when we talk about safety or multimodal accessibility or land use coordination, a lot of the objectives that we're going to be measuring are really pointing to more than one goal. And so all of these things that we're considering are not necessarily going to show up under each goal individually. So happy to answer any questions or get any feedback. If there's something that's still confusing, I'm happy to hear that, but mostly just wanted to show you that we've been taking your feedback and really trying to be really thoughtful about how we're working this before we start presenting it to the public. Questions, comments, feedback?
I appreciate the amount of work you guys have gone through this. I know it's been a long slog, how you get these things defined. The lens thing, the concept, that's a good one. One thing I'm still a little bit, and it's nice that Will's going to speak to this. How does this differentiate one project from the other? That's one question. And the second question is, how in 5 years we come back and we assess whether or not we met these goals? How will we know that we met them?
Well, okay, as far as helping us differentiate all of these projects against each other, one of the things that we're going to use for each of these objectives, we're developing metrics, or we have metrics that are developed. And so those metrics are going to help us evaluate how the system is operating and identify where there are priority needs. And so we're going to take this framework, apply data that helps us assess it, and then that will help us evaluate the system to see where there are deficiencies based on these overarching like ideologies. As far as the assessment, like how will we know if we meet our goals? Do you want to say anything about how that's done within the LRTP, or what really the purpose of goals are within the LRTP? Well, and for those of you that don't know, Will is with EPR, and he's one of the consultants that has been retained to support the development of the long range transportation plan.
Have fun staff.
Yeah, and he used to work here.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, but it's hard to bring more value than to what you just said. I mean, certainly the goals and objectives, as is done with the other 15 long range transportation plans across Virginia, that is really what guides the development of those performance measures on projects. But kind of the secondary or tertiary values of the goals would be that those goals objectives should also help in terms of the design of those projects. So let's say there's a need that's identified, there is a project that's needed, and so those goals should help with the development of different transportation alternatives to address that goal. I think also these goals objectives are helpful as you're defining what your needs are. So obviously, if you develop a transportation project, you want that project to address a need. You wouldn't have a project that's pushed forward that's not doing something that's defined as a need there. So I think the goals objectives there are helpful to help define what those needs are across the region. And we just had a conversation about the UPWP, and I think really good LRTPs, I think, are ones that go beyond the limits of just the plan itself. It should really be integrated into everything else that the MPO is doing. So when you just had a discussion about the TIP, you just had a discussion about the UPWP. So goals and objectives should be considerations that the MPO and its committees take into account when you're looking at the work program for the MPO. And so, in terms of now, like measuring, how have we accomplished these goals? I mean, the real purpose of the long range plan is the project list, and the document itself is really showing the justification to that list there. And so, I mean, there are some things that you could do. I know that some MPOs have talked about, having more like an annual, using air quotes, because there's no such thing as like a formalized review, but some sort of check-in each year to see, hey, these are the goals, objectives that we've stated. How do we feel we're doing kind of in a qualitative way of kind of moving along those lines? But really the main focus is those performance measures that Sandy was mentioning, that will be used to score those projects.
And when will those performance measures be something that the tech committee can understand what's going on with those?
We'll probably talk about those in either July or August. When we get there, before we start actually running the evaluation of the project scores, we'll have to determine which of those metric thresholds and how we want to measure all of that.
And at that
data.
point, your contract will that pretty much be already paid and installed to define those goals, run the metrics and stuff like
You're talking about the OIP contract?
No, ma'am. The one we will work.
That's not what they're doing. No.
So you said that the goals here have metrics, those
Mhm.
metrics be used prior to projects. I'm just. If we're gonna see those in July.
You've already seen those. Those are part of that prioritization process that we worked through. So we'll need to discuss. We'll need to discuss which of those we want to use, but we've already largely identified how we're measuring a lot of these different goals and objectives.
Yeah, we got that in the last meeting.
And if I could add just really quickly.
Yeah.
And also the structure essay is kind of seen as generally best practice. So, we worked on the rail now, long-range transportation plan. It's funny, like the parallel thought, because you showed me this graphic and that's the exact same graphic they came up with. Didn't even tell you about it. So Roanoke used a pretty similar process. Shenandoah Valley Regional Commission used similar structure process that Sandy's talking about. Lynchburg, LRTP, same basic structure to it. So I think staff's been looking at other long-range plans across the Commonwealth. Is put a lot of effort to defining, what are best practices that, from just our consultant view, I think following along those best practices.
So just say the line of thought here on how do you measure, right? 'Cause I think that's very important. It's only trying to do these projects and throw out a lot of energy into that we necessarily measure to see what could be achieved. And you put it very well and I encourage you to continue to develop that thinking of the goals and objectives that we use to identify projects and design those, so that this is the need that we're, as you put it very well, this is the need that we're filling through this project. That should be your measure as well, right? So while it's weighted to architecture, post occupancy evaluation, right? So after a building's done, and we usually wait, we don't do it immediately because there's a lot of things going on, right? With the systems and everything else, not quite right. So usually wait a year, 18 months. So you set a time, and that's something you could do. And so you don't necessarily have it formalized, but you can. And just say, all right, after maybe just 6 months, right, over a year, we're going to evaluate, where safety's goals met, where equity in terms of multimodal transportation and ease of access and visibility met. And so I think these are things that can be measured. And you should build it in. It shouldn't be that complicated, because as you said, you're identifying the need. So once you identify the need, you can identify the measure. So, yeah, I think you're in the right track there. It's just a matter of how you formalize it, how you put some language so that you can continue it.
Well, maybe accounting for that process as part of the development of the plan, kind of talking about what we will do and how we will do that.
And that helps too with like the travel man modeling process too. It's good to, once you've developed a project, monitor, evaluate, and then that helps to make for a better travel man model too, because you get to basically test it out. The model said it would do this, we built it. How did that work out? And maybe we need to reevaluate some assumptions in the modeling process. But yeah,
Sure.
It should do a lot of different things for you. The core is what Sandy was talking about. It really, that scoring process that helps identify those projects. And we're required to do that according to federal requirements. And I will say, I remember back earlier LRTPs when it wasn't necessarily done that way. It was kind of more like what are the local official gut feelings of what should be the projects to move forward. So, really we're supposed to have a data-driven process. So
That said, are there any other comments on that? Because then we can talk about how public engagement is going to also be incorporated. Any other feedback? Okay. All right. So that said, we have a data-driven process, but we also need to have a public participation element to this plan as well, and that's really important. And so the purpose of public engagement, as far as us thinking through what that's going to look like moving into the summer and moving towards getting feedback from the public for this plan, is that there are a couple of different things we are trying to accomplish as far as this first phase of public engagement. First of all, we want the public to be aware that there is a long-range transportation planning process that is underway. We want to inform them on what the purpose of the plan is, what the requirements of the plan is, and why it's important for them to be engaged. So this is largely about helping raise awareness and helping to inform them so they know that their participation in the plan is going to be valuable and meaningful. We do want to start getting high-level feedback on the goals from the public. So one of the things we're going to be asking in our Metro Quest survey is for the public to tell us how important are these different goals related to each other. And that's going to be information that we can take to determine how much weight do we give to each of these metrics as we evaluate the system to determine where are the highest priority needs based on the community's feedback using a data-driven approach. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to have a mapping exercise where the public can drop in their markers to show us where they see a need for transportation improvements. Based on Will's commentary, this is actually where we're going to expect to hear the most valuable feedback from the public. And so what's going to happen is we have the public that is going to be helping inform how much weight to give all of the different goals in terms of evaluating the data that we're collecting and using to analyze the system for the needs. And then we're going to get feedback on where the public actually sees identified needs. And both of those together are going to give us a really good view of where there is commonalities between perceived needs and data needs that are identified by our data analysis process, and also help us see where there might be some discrepancies. And we're going to use that information to help us start identifying where the highest priority needs are. The purpose of identifying the highest priority needs is that then we can go back and look at our slate of projects that have been developed through other pipeline efforts to determine what are the projects that might make sense to start pulling into this process to prioritize as far as our future funding applications. Or it will help us identify where there's a really high system need, but we don't have an identified solution to that project yet. And so that's what's going to help us build our pipeline, our planning pipeline to identify these projects in the future for future funding requests or implementation. So any question about that as like a general process? Okay. All right, so our public engagement schedule, tentatively, we're planning on mid-June. We'll do a project kickoff / open house. We'll do both an in-person event at this space as well. That will probably just be like a poster setup where people can walk through. There probably won't be a presentation. And then we'll also plan to do a virtual open house that will be more of a presentation driven. Again, the goal from this will be to have some opportunities for people to provide comments on maps. We'll have information about how to take the survey available there, and then also just to provide background information to inform and raise awareness of the project. We'll be reaching out to the stakeholders that we'd already identified, and then we're also working to identify other community contacts that can help us get the word out. We'll be looking for opportunities to meet with table at different events or high traffic locations throughout the region, as well as meet with the CACs in Albemarle County, and we'll be reaching out to the homeowners associations. We do have a survey that is available that we've drafted that we're planning to develop. I don't know if anybody took a chance to look at the link, but do you want to talk about kind of the purpose of the survey? We'll talk about kind of what information is helpful to capture via survey.
Yeah, sure. So being just this stage of the planning process, one of the main objectives is to identify needs. So how do people define their needs? What specific issues or concerns do they have? And so as Sandy was saying, that map is probably, you know, from my experience, that's the most important information you can get out of the survey here. Because what you can do is you can take the responses from the map, you can turn it into a heat map, overlay it with projects, overlay it with other data like PSI locations, level of service, VC ratios, and get to see, you know, what's the correlation between these people concerned, those needs and issues, and what the data says or what the projects show, and so forth. Another thing that does is sometimes the data doesn't show you everything. You know, that secondary data is good, but there might be some missing pieces to that you wouldn't otherwise pick up from a spreadsheet or from some other data set. So getting that feedback on the concern side, the issues driven part of the survey is really helpful. Just to see that what's missing, and then staff can take that and determine what additional data gathering efforts might be needed to really fully define what those needs are. Also having here the goals, so a little bit more like a goals driven approach. Surveys are not really good at goals. Surveys are great at identifying concerns, needs, problems, issues. It allows somebody to write. Is a good solid survey function. But really like defining goals, it's a little bit weaker there. However, stakeholder groups are great for goal making, and so staff has gone through stakeholder groups, has talked with this group here, and so now this is a more appropriate function of the survey. Is these the goals that we've come up with, and to get reactions on those to help prioritize those. The prioritization here is important because how you prioritize the goals then affects kind of that triangle working its way down to those performance measures and how you evaluate those projects. So this is kind of an indirect way, but it is the main way that we use to define, what is most important to the community, and that then affects how that scoring happens. What does that spreadsheet look like, and the scoring of those projects. So it's really focused on sort of needs driven, so identifying needs, focused on evaluation goals, so the goals driven aspect to it. And then I did like how staff had kind of this trade-off tab in here in the survey to get into a little bit more nuance. And I know these are really hard questions to ask, and I know staff spent a lot of time really trying to wordsmith these. But I do think what comes out of it will be important, because as you're looking at an important part of this plan is there will be needs identified where there's not currently a project in place. There's a lot of projects. There's a backlog of projects. But there are still, I guarantee, needs out there where there's not an existing designed, vetted plan project in place. So as we identify those needs and the orphaned of any solution currently, these types of questions will help identify what types of alternatives or solutions should come to bear to address those gaps, those what you might call net gap needs. So, okay, right.
No, thank you. Well, one thing I want to mention about the trade-offs is that I think we all anticipate that we can predict how or what responses to expect. So it's not that we don't understand that multimodal planning is a really high priority for this region, but this trade-offs is really to help us, intended to help us sort of understand to what extent should we consider multimodal improvements against roadway improvements. Is this a strong preference, or is it a little bit of a weaker preference? So I want everybody to understand going into this that we do have a strong sense that, we likely can anticipate what the outcomes are, but in terms of actually assigning value to the performance measures, this will help us do that a little bit more accurately. Any questions or comments on the survey tool?
Format of it's kind of.
Yeah.
Everything like school.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to have access to VDOT's MetroQuest services. All right. Any other questions or comments about the public engagement?
For the interactive map tool, can I just, they click on the location, or they
You like drag the little marker down
okay.
and you can put it in, and you can.
Let's say maybe it's concerned about, so they want to have, I don't know, an example. They want to see a path from Earlysville down to next.
Yeah.
Can they draw paths in that?
Oh, they won't be able to draw a path,
Okay.
but they can put a marker and they can write the comment down, and yeah,
That's cool.
yeah. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you all. All right, well, we're losing our committee members, Rory.
Yeah.
All right, anyone have any updates? Bill says Alderman McCormick is closed all summer.
Yeah.
Drive anywhere.
And Lane Road, behind the hospital, and, Massey Road, in like 5J. So it's gonna be a mess over there. So,
Close the cars, or just all kinds of general.
mostly cars, I think there's always a pedestrian way through, but it's gonna be interesting. But it'll be done this summer. I'm back in the fall, I won't know. Yeah. It's, yeah.
The other updates,
Back to work week.
free beer yesterday,
Yeah,
there's all sorts of other great stuff today.
there is. We had the bike bus this morning, which we had a little stop out here at PEC. There's gonna be 2 county events. I'll let you update on those later, and then I think some additional tomorrow morning at Shenanigans, there will be a swag and snack station in the morning, and then a couple on UVA campus as well.
And for the county stuff on Thursday, there'll be a little stop in front of the building, kind of like on this front step, a little picnic area. That'll be in the morning from like 7:30 to 9, probably, and then in the afternoon, 4 to 6, we'll be having the e-bike demo and what we call a mid lot. It's just a lot where the EV chargers are, so we'll have that mostly cordoned off. It's not a gigantic space, but it's good enough that people can come out there kind of just at least see what e-bikes are and kind of like oh, these are legitimate like devices, and it's not just like some random dude just like that $2 tip around on the streets. That'll be exciting, I think. And then what's Friday? Friday.
I think Friday was maybe gonna be a potential. I don't know if it got solidified bike ride to Fridays after 5.
Okay.
But we're gonna do a celebration event and you realize that's graduation weekend and there's no place like that.
That's like county for updates, secondary teacher plan, that'll go on, I'm going to report tomorrow for that, it'll be over. Still gonna be going on forever, but, and then. Comp plan updates, working on phase 2 right now, and right now, we're been working on kind of identifying centers, activity centers in the county, they've been working with. Developing planning toolkits, with citizen feedback to kind of understand, how they can essentially put on the planner hats and look at places from kind of point of view and kind of like, okay, what are some aspects of planners that we like, that we don't like, we want to see, we don't want to see. It's a part of the Stonefield, it's not very popular with a lot of people, and Barrett's Road is, which I didn't. There are a lot of reasons, so it's interesting. And then Freebird's Lane pilot program is still progressing. I think we're still talking parts and back beat up kind of like what gate to use and kind of like the rules and when we don't just do that roads. And then for these Route 23 East path, we got some conceptual drawing materials, I think, so far, just kind of showing some potential amounts that we could take to get a trees path down there. It'll be an interesting engineering feat, and kind of interesting to see how. It's what lemon they determined to be fast, takes each stuff field higher ramps, like all the off ramps around there, so. That's all I have, like counting. Here again, at 1 o'clock, we're 3 o'clock.
Okay.
City is deep in its zoning rewrites. That's the main thing happening. We should get model 3 later this month, and then have a consolidated draft by a month and a half or so from now, and then planning commission and council delivery. So ideally, we'll have it done by the end of the year. Certainly, I would have loved to hear updates from city staff on whether any of the projects that were supposed to go out this spring are doing that, but maybe anyone, yeah, well, we can pray. I'll just I think that's all I got for city updates at the moment. Anything else? Anyone?
I think we talked about the beat out ones already.
All right, well, we still don't have any member of the public, so.
Oh, Tiffany, do you have updates?
I was gonna say, I wasn't sure if VDOT had an update, so I didn't want to jump in really quick. So just a quick update, as mentioned with the discussion about SIPs and TIPs. Our draft fiscal year 24 6-year improvement program is available on DRPT's open data portal. That's available for any of our grantees or any recipients that applied for any of our grant programs in the late fall, early winter. So we hope to have that presented to the CTV and approved for implementation on July 1st. We are also currently reviewing our fiscal year 24 5303 applications. So thank you for the great discussion on UPWP. I always love hearing about that. We did also want to highlight the Virginia statewide rail plan that was approved by FRA, and it did also get recognition because it is the first of its kind that is actually completely online. So it is using kind of the ArcGIS story map layout. I'll provide to the staff in my agency update a link. So I encourage everyone to look at it. And we are going to keep that format, hosting it through DRPT and doing periodic updates to the map or to the plan. It's roughly about a 4-year time frame for FRA to require all states to have their rail plan updated. But I encourage you all, especially if you are very much a GIS fan, I can't say nerd, but fan, to kind of explore it. And then there's also a wealth of data. So I think if you're interested in this discussion about passenger and freight rail, take a look. And I think the last thing I want to note is that we have been working on a Discover Transit campaign. We launched it in the middle of April, but we are continuing to do a campaign also on the heels of us finishing up our 30th year anniversary of promotions that we've been doing. So we're trying to use all of our communications and our marketing materials to be able to bring people again back to transit and public transportation in general, especially after the impacts of COVID and the pandemic. So if you are interested in kind of looking at materials, media placement, we are also going to do some targeted advertisements throughout the Commonwealth, but more information can be found, and I'll provide the link in my agency update. There was also a webinar that we did host, so if you're interested in the full breadth of information, you can watch that on the DRPT YouTube page. But that's all I have for my updates, and it was wonderful to kind of listen in as kind of like a former MPO person to hear the discussion about the TIP and the UPWP. So I'm glad you guys are continuing the great work you're doing here. And that's all I have for my update.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks. All right, anybody else? Cool, I guess we are adjourned then. Thanks.
Bye. Oh, I can leave that out actually. Sorry, I don't know.